She forgot to end the call, and I heard my mom say I was a mistake. I froze in my small Chicago apartment, my phone still in my hand. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words echoed in my head over and over, each repetition hitting harder than the last. I didn't know whether to feel anger, sadness, or disbelief. How could the woman who was supposed to love me unconditionally say something so cruel? I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but I was too stunned to move. I sank onto the couch, trying to process what I had just heard. I thought about every argument, every cold look, every time I felt invisible in my own home. Maybe those moments weren't my imagination. Maybe they were the pieces of a truth I was only now realizing. My dad, who always seemed distant, probably knew but never said a word. And Ethan, my older brother, had always received attention effortlessly while I had to fight for even the smallest recognition. I remembered my childhood in flashes, birthday parties where I was almost forgotten, school achievements barely acknowledged, the way my mom's eyes would soften for Ethan but remain distant when she looked at me. I had always chalked it up to personality differences, to the fact that she and I didn't see eye to eye. But hearing her say I was a mistake made me realize it was never about me being difficult or rebellious. It was never about anything I had done. It was about how she felt all along. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment, about the call that should have ended normally. The thought that she didn't even realize I was listening made it sting even more. It made me see how careless she had been, how easily she dismissed my existence in her life. My chest ached with a mix of heartbreak and anger. I wanted to understand why she would think such a thing, why she would say it out loud, and yet, I knew I probably wouldn't get answers. Some truths in life are too painful for people to admit, and some betrayals are too deep for apologies to fix. As the night went on, I sat quietly, thinking about what this meant for my life and my family. I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep living as though her words didn't matter because they did. They shaped me, in ways I hadn't realized until that moment. And even though I was hurt, I felt a strange clarity forming inside me. If my own mother could see me as a mistake, I had to see myself differently. I had to take control of my own life, my own choices, and my own happiness. That night, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let her definition of me, her indifference, or her words determine my worth. I would prove to myself, and to anyone who ever doubted me, that I was not a mistake. I would rise above the coldness and betrayal, and I would do it on my own terms. The first step was understanding the truth, and the truth was that I deserved better than the way she had made me feel all my life. Since that night, I started noticing things I had ignored before. Small patterns that didn't make sense until now. My mom, Karen, seemed to celebrate Ethan's achievements more than mine. Even simple things, like a compliment on a school project or a promotion at work, were barely acknowledged. Meanwhile, Ethan got praise, gifts, and encouragement for everything, no matter how small. At first, I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that maybe I was overthinking. But deep down, a knot of suspicion was growing in my stomach. I remembered moments from my childhood I had pushed aside. Like the time I brought home my first art award, and my mom only glanced at it before turning back to Ethan's homework. Or my high school graduation, where she barely looked at me while cheering loudly for him. It was subtle, easy to dismiss, but now I could see a pattern, a clear favoritism I had lived with without realizing it. These memories made me ache, but they also sparked something inside me. I wanted to understand why. Around that time, I started talking more with Madison Lewis, a friend from work who had always been supportive. Madison noticed my quiet frustration and encouraged me to pay attention to my instincts. "Olivia, don't ignore how you feel," she said. "Your feelings are valid. Sometimes the people closest to us aren't as kind as we think." Her words stuck with me. For the first time, I had someone outside my family who confirmed that my feelings mattered, and that my intuition wasn't wrong. The real shock came when I found out about the money. I learned that my mom had been giving Ethan financial help behind the scenes, college funds, gifts, opportunities she never offered me. It wasn't just favoritism anymore, it was a deliberate choice to support him while leaving me to fend for myself. The realization hit hard. Everything started to make sense: the indifference, the coldness, the way I had always felt second in my own home. I began keeping mental notes, silently observing my family and their behavior. I noticed how Karen subtly undermined me, how she rarely included me in important conversations, and how she made decisions that controlled parts of my life without consulting me. It was as if she had been shaping my life to fit a mold that didn't include me, while Ethan got the freedom and support she withheld from me. The weight of it all was heavy, but it also gave me clarity. I couldn't ignore these patterns any longer. I had to see things as they were, not as I had been taught to believe. My mother's disdain had shaped my past, but I could decide how it shaped my future. The pieces of neglect, favoritism, and betrayal were now visible, and I was ready to face them. I knew that understanding this was the first step toward taking control of my own life and not letting her continue to define me. I decided I couldn't stay quiet any longer. I needed to understand why my mom treated me differently from Ethan. One evening, I asked her directly but carefully, trying not to start a fight. "Mom, do you think you've ever treated me differently from Ethan?" I asked, my voice steady but my heart pounding. She looked at me, a faint smirk crossing her face. "I don't know what you mean, Olivia. Maybe you're just imagining things," she said, her tone calm but laced with subtle judgment. I tried to press further, but every question I asked was met with vague answers or sarcasm. It was like she was skilled at deflecting, making me doubt my own feelings while refusing to give me real answers. Her passive-aggressive comments cut deeper than any argument we had before. Each word felt like a reminder of years I had spent trying to gain her approval. I realized then that this wasn't a one-time mistake or misunderstanding, it was a consistent pattern. Everything she had done had subtly undermined me, keeping me second to Ethan, keeping me from feeling truly supported or valued in my own family. The pain of that realization was sharp. I felt betrayed, not just by her words, but by years of neglect hidden beneath the guise of parenting. The anger inside me started to build, but it wasn't blind rage. It was a clear, burning desire for justice, not revenge to hurt her, but a drive to show that I was not defined by her opinion. I needed to take control of my life in ways she could not touch. That night, I made a decision. I would channel all of this pain and anger into myself. I focused on my work, determined to excel beyond what anyone in my family expected. I started taking on more challenging projects, showing initiative, and pushing myself in ways I had never dared before. Each success was a quiet triumph, proof that I could thrive without her support or approval. At the same time, I worked on creating independence in my personal life. I budgeted carefully, saved money, and made plans to move out permanently. I wanted a life where I could make my own decisions without her interference, where my worth was defined by my actions, not her approval. As I worked toward my goals, a new sense of strength grew inside me. I realized that the best way to respond to someone who tried to diminish me was to build myself up. Each accomplishment was a step away from her control and a step toward proving, quietly but undeniably, that I was capable, strong, and deserving of respect. By the time I looked back at that first confrontation, I understood that it wasn't about making her pay, it was about reclaiming my own life. The anger that had once felt heavy and painful had turned into a tool, guiding me toward success, independence, and a life she could never take away from me. It all came to light one rainy afternoon when I went through some old family documents I had stored in the attic. I was looking for a copy of my college records when I stumbled across financial statements and letters that made my heart drop. My mom had mismanaged the money that was supposed to be mine, college funds, savings, even small investments she had promised to protect. Instead, most of it had gone to Ethan. I felt my stomach turn as I read the details. She hadn't just favored him emotionally, she had made sure he had a financial advantage while leaving me struggling to cover expenses. It was deliberate, not accidental. Every scholarship I had applied for, every part-time job I had worked, had been because my mom refused to give me the support she gave Ethan effortlessly. The betrayal cut even deeper when I realized my dad had known all along. He had always seemed distant, and now I understood why. He had watched, silently, as my mother redirected my money to Ethan, and he hadn't said a word. The people I had trusted most, my own parents, had actively worked against my future. I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath me. Everything I believed about my family, about fairness, about trust, seemed like a lie. I sat down in silence, staring at the papers. My emotions were a mix of anger, disbelief, and grief. I couldn't believe they had done this, and I couldn't believe I had missed it all these years. I felt small, overlooked, and manipulated in ways I had never imagined. But along with the shock, a quiet determination began to grow inside me. I knew I had to be careful. I began documenting everything quietly, making notes about dates, amounts, conversations, and evidence of how my mom and dad had favored Ethan. I organized the papers, kept digital copies, and made sure nothing could be lost or destroyed. I wasn't sure yet what I would do with the information, but I knew it could be useful one day. This wasn't about revenge in a petty sense. It was about justice and protecting myself. I wanted to make sure that if the time ever came, I could stand firm, knowing I had the truth on my side. The betrayal had left a wound, but it also gave me clarity. I could see the patterns of manipulation, the way my parents had tried to control my life and shape my future without my knowledge. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I made a silent promise. I would not let them define me or control my life any longer. I would use this knowledge, this proof, to ensure that I could live on my own terms. The betrayal had been painful, but it had also given me a roadmap. I would rise above it, and when the time came, I would make sure they saw that the child they dismissed as a mistake had become someone they could never ignore. I finally moved into my own apartment, a small but comfortable space in downtown Chicago. It felt like a fresh start, a place where I could breathe without the weight of my family's expectations pressing down on me. For the first time, I felt truly independent. I managed my own bills, cooked my own meals, and made decisions without needing anyone's approval. It was liberating, even if it came with the challenges of living on my own. At work, I poured all my energy into my projects. I took on assignments that others avoided and stayed late when it mattered. Slowly, my hard work started to pay off. My boss noticed my dedication and promoted me to a position I had long wanted. The feeling of accomplishment was incredible. Each achievement was proof that I could succeed on my own, without relying on my family or their approval. Around this time, I met Jake Reynolds, a colleague who quickly became more than just a coworker. He noticed my focus, my determination, and the quiet strength I carried, even under stress. Jake was supportive in a way I hadn't experienced before. He encouraged me when I doubted myself and celebrated my successes with genuine enthusiasm. With him around, I realized that meaningful connections didn't have to be complicated or conditional, they could be real. As I settled into my new life, I felt a growing confidence I hadn't known before. I no longer worried about my mother's opinions or her attempts to control me from afar. Her words and actions had lost their power over me. I made decisions freely, financially, emotionally, and professionally, without second-guessing myself. Even though my mother occasionally tried to interfere or guilt me with calls or comments, I could feel her influence slipping away. Each time I stood firm, each time I pursued my goals without hesitation, I reclaimed a piece of myself that had been stifled for years. The distance wasn't just physical, it was emotional. I had learned to rely on my own judgment, to trust my instincts, and to value my own worth above the approval of anyone who had once dismissed me. Living independently and achieving success didn't erase the pain of the past, but it gave me strength. I could see clearly now how far I had come and how capable I was. The independence I built wasn't just about moving into a new apartment or earning a promotion, it was about claiming my life and proving to myself that I could thrive despite the betrayal and neglect I had endured. For the first time, I felt untouchable in my own world. My mother's coldness no longer dictated my feelings or decisions. I was in control, and with each passing day, my life became more about what I wanted and less about what she tried to impose. That clarity and confidence were my true victories, and they set the stage for everything I planned to achieve next. I started spending quiet evenings alone, thinking about my childhood and the moments I had buried deep in my memory. I pulled out an old journal and began writing everything down, the times I felt invisible, the words my mother said, and the small victories she never celebrated. Putting my memories on paper helped me see patterns I had missed, and slowly the full picture of her manipulation became clear. She had always controlled what I could do, subtly undermined my confidence, and favored Ethan in ways that shaped my entire life. Reading through my own words, I realized how deeply the emotional damage ran. I had spent years doubting myself, thinking I was the problem, when in reality, her indifference and criticism had been designed to keep me small. The clarity was painful but empowering. I understood that I wasn't weak, I had been held back by someone who refused to see my worth. That realization fueled something inside me, a determination to reclaim everything she had tried to control. I also remembered the night that changed everything, the night I heard her say I was a mistake. The memory hit me like a knife. I could still hear the words, clear and cruel, echoing in my mind. It reminded me of why I needed to take control of my life and prove that I was far from a mistake. That single phrase became a quiet but powerful motivator. As I reflected, I started planning. I didn't want revenge in the way people often think. There was no need to humiliate or hurt her. Instead, I wanted a subtle kind of justice, to live my life fully, succeed on my own terms, and let her witness it without being able to interfere. I wanted her to see the woman I had become, someone confident, accomplished, and independent, and realize that she had lost her chance to shape me. I began imagining the steps I would take, the goals I would set, and the milestones I would reach. Everything was about building myself, not tearing her down. Every success, every small victory, would serve as proof that I could rise above the cruelty and neglect I had endured. Writing in my journal became a ritual, a way to organize my thoughts and solidify my intentions. I detailed everything I wanted to achieve: career milestones, personal growth, financial independence. I wanted to make sure that when the time came, there would be no doubt about who I was and what I had accomplished. By the end of each night, I felt stronger and more focused. Revisiting my past had been painful, but it had also given me purpose. I understood my mother's manipulations, acknowledged the damage they caused, and used it as fuel to build the life she couldn't control. That clarity, combined with the memory of her cruel words, became the driving force behind every decision I made, every goal I set, and every step I took toward my own success. I began taking deliberate steps to reclaim control over my life. I started by reviewing the financial documents I had found earlier and carefully recovering what was rightfully mine. It wasn't easy, but every dollar I reclaimed felt like a small victory, proof that I could stand on my own. At the same time, I continued to focus on my work, taking on bigger projects and responsibilities. Slowly, people at the office began noticing my dedication and skill. As I gained recognition, my mother noticed too. She tried to interfere in subtle ways, making comments, questioning my decisions, or attempting to guilt me into feeling dependent on her. But this time, I didn't let her affect me. I stayed calm, composed, and focused on my goals. Her attempts to undermine me had no effect. Instead, they only reinforced my determination to succeed on my own terms. My revenge wasn't about hurting her, it was about showing my worth. I let my success speak for itself. I received promotions, recognition at work, and earned respect from my colleagues. Every achievement was a quiet statement: I was capable, independent, and thriving despite years of neglect. I didn't need to argue or prove anything through confrontation. My life became the proof of my strength. I also made sure to maintain composure in front of others. Friends and coworkers admired the way I handled challenges and setbacks. They saw me as resilient, confident, and strong, and that recognition felt like the kind of validation my mother had never given me. I realized that demonstrating my success quietly but clearly was far more satisfying than any argument or verbal revenge could ever be. As my life began to flourish, I noticed a shift in my own confidence. I stopped questioning myself, doubting my decisions, or worrying about what my mother thought. Every step I took toward independence and achievement was a statement that I no longer needed her approval or validation. I was building a life she couldn't control, and that realization gave me a sense of freedom I had never felt before. Even small victories mattered. Paying bills on time, decorating my apartment the way I liked, choosing my own path at work, each decision reinforced my independence. My friends noticed my transformation too. They supported me, celebrated my wins, and reminded me of how far I had come. Their encouragement strengthened my resolve to continue growing and succeeding. By quietly reclaiming control, proving my worth, and achieving success, I created a form of revenge that was far more powerful than any confrontation or argument could have been. My mother could see my growth, but she could no longer touch it or influence it. I had built a life on my own terms, and every accomplishment became a testament to my resilience, intelligence, and strength. In that way, my revenge was complete, without cruelty, simply the undeniable proof that I had risen above her manipulation and neglect. Karen started noticing changes in me, though I could tell she tried to hide it. I was more confident, independent, and focused than ever before. I no longer reacted to her jabs or tried to win her approval. At family gatherings, I stayed calm and polite, but distant, refusing to engage in the manipulations and favoritism that had once dominated our interactions. I could see her arrogance beginning to crack. She would make comments or try subtle control, but I didn't give her the reaction she wanted. She couldn't guilt me, intimidate me, or sway my decisions anymore. Every attempt she made to pull me back into old patterns failed, and I watched quietly as she realized she no longer had the power she once held over me. It was a bittersweet feeling. Part of me wanted her to understand the years of neglect, the ways she had undermined me, but another part of me didn't need her acknowledgement at all. I felt the satisfaction of knowing that my life was mine to control. I had built it on my own terms, and no amount of criticism, manipulation, or favoritism could change that. Seeing her powerless over my life was its own reward. It wasn't about revenge in the cruel sense, it wasn't about making her feel small or ashamed. Instead, it was about proving to myself that I could rise above the treatment I had endured. My victories, independence, and confidence were not for her, they were for me. They were proof that I was capable, strong, and deserving of respect, regardless of what she had said or done. I noticed small moments that marked the shift. She would glance at my apartment or hear about my work achievements, and I could see her discomfort. She realized she could no longer influence my choices, no longer dictate my worth. The power dynamic that had defined our relationship for so long had shifted completely. The emotional payoff wasn't about seeing her regret or apologize. It was about the quiet pride I felt for myself. Every promotion I earned, every decision I made independently, and every boundary I set reinforced that I had overcome years of neglect and favoritism. I had created a life that reflected my values, abilities, and strength. In that clarity, I finally felt free. I didn't need to prove anything to her or seek her validation. I had achieved the kind of independence and success that could not be taken away, and that alone was the ultimate vindication. The satisfaction I felt came from knowing I had not just survived, but thrived. I had turned pain and betrayal into strength, and that realization was far more powerful than any argument, apology, or confrontation could ever be. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. I had reclaimed my life, my confidence, and my self-worth. Karen's inability to control me was proof that I had grown beyond her influence, and that growth was the most satisfying victory of all. I knew the time had come to face my mother directly. I invited Karen to my apartment one evening, determined to speak calmly and clearly. I looked her in the eyes and said, "Mom, I need to tell you how your words and actions have affected me all my life. The favoritism toward Ethan, the way you dismissed me, and the time I overheard you say I was a mistake, it hurt more than you can imagine." She shifted uncomfortably, trying to find the right words, but none came easily. I could see her struggling to defend herself, realizing that the control she had always held over me was gone. For the first time, she couldn't brush it off or make me doubt my own feelings. It was clear she had never expected me to confront her so directly. Ethan was present as well, and I addressed him too. I explained how his position in the family had never made me feel equal or valued, and how I had spent years navigating their favoritism. He listened quietly, and I could tell he was starting to understand that I was no longer vulnerable to manipulation. In that moment, I felt untouchable. The fear and insecurity that had shadowed me for years were gone, replaced by a calm strength. I made my boundaries clear. I don't need forgiveness from you, Mom, and I'm not asking for it. But I do expect honesty, respect, and fairness from this point forward. I will no longer allow your actions to define my life or my happiness. I wanted to ensure there was no ambiguity. My life was mine, and I wasn't stepping back into the old patterns of fear or dependence. Karen looked taken aback, and for a brief moment, I saw regret, or maybe just surprise, on her face. I didn't need to see her apology. I didn't need her to fix anything. I only needed to assert myself, to reclaim the control I had lost for so many years. The act of speaking my truth gave me a weightless relief I hadn't expected. For the first time, I felt fully independent, not just financially or professionally, but emotionally. I no longer sought approval from my mother. I no longer felt the sting of her words or the pressure of her favoritism. I had reclaimed my life, and I understood that my worth wasn't tied to her recognition. By the end of the conversation, there was a quiet tension, but also clarity. I had expressed my pain, set boundaries, and asserted my independence. The emotional relief was profound. Years of frustration, heartbreak, and doubt had been released simply by standing my ground. I finally felt free to live my life fully, without fear, guilt, or the need to please anyone who had tried to diminish me. Walking away from that conversation, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had faced the people who had hurt me, stated my truth, and claimed my space. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about freedom, dignity, and the knowledge that I was no longer defined by anyone else's choices or words. I was finally in charge of my life. Looking back on everything, I realized how much the betrayal I experienced shaped who I had become. Hearing my mom say I was a mistake, growing up with favoritism toward Ethan, and discovering the ways my family had undermined me could have destroyed me. Instead, it became a catalyst for growth. I learned that revenge doesn't have to be cruel or mean-spirited, it can be about living better, making smarter choices, and building a life that reflects your worth. Every step I took toward independence, every success I achieved at work, every boundary I set was a form of quiet victory. I didn't need to lash out or humiliate anyone to prove myself. My life itself became the proof that I was capable, strong, and deserving of happiness. I realized that true revenge is in thriving where others expected you to fail, in showing resilience without losing your dignity. The emotional strength I developed along the way became my greatest asset. I learned to trust myself, to rely on my own judgment, and to value my own needs above the approval of anyone who had tried to control me. Life became richer because I refused to let my mother's cruelty define me. Her words no longer had power over me, and the fear and self-doubt I had carried for years began to fade. I also understood that betrayal, as painful as it is, can teach important lessons. It showed me who I could depend on, what kind of boundaries I needed, and the kind of life I wanted to build. I became more intelligent in my decisions, more strategic in my actions, and more persistent in pursuing my goals. Every challenge I faced became a stepping stone rather than a barrier. Now, when I think about my mother, there is no hatred. Instead, there is quiet power. I see her not as someone who can hurt me anymore, but as a person whose influence over me has ended. I survived the cruelty, and I thrived in spite of it. That survival, that growth, is my true triumph. It's a victory that doesn't need to be loud or dramatic, because it's visible in every part of my life, my independence, my achievements, and my peace of mind. The final lesson I carry with me is clear: life may hurt you through betrayal, but integrity, intelligence, and persistence build a legacy stronger than anyone's malice. The people who try to diminish you can never take away what you create with your own hands, your own mind, and your own heart. I look at my life now and feel proud. I don't need approval or validation from the people who once hurt me. I am in control, and that control is my power. I have learned, grown, and built a life that reflects my true self. And in that, there is a satisfaction deeper than revenge, Because I have survived, I have thrived, and I have become someone my younger self would have been proud to be.